Radio TV Phono Nut here, and continuing with the commentary on my life as a legally blind person. I thought we'd talk about how I got into electronics and that sort of thing, and some challenges that were faced along the way. But what you see before you is an old talking book machine from 1959. It works fine. I don't think I did a video on this. It just needed drive mechanism repair. The amplifier was fine, but I've just got this up for something to look at while we do the video. But before we get into that, the dog that you've heard barking in several of my videos, and you've probably seen him a few times too, he has not been doing good lately. He was basically doing okay until he wasn't, and then he started coughing and hacking, and fluid was building up, and he was having trouble breathing, and I took him to the vet, and she told me I can put him on some pills, but at best it's only going to be a band-aid on a problem. It's not going to be a cure, but it might buy him some time and make him more comfortable. She said some dogs respond to it, some don't, so I'm only going to give you a 10-day supply, and then if that works out, then we'll see about getting the prescriptions refilled. Well, sadly, the pills are really not doing anything. He's gotten to the point now where he's just really not eating. He's not going to the bathroom like he should. He's moving around very slowly. And he's gotten to the point where he just sits all the time, and I think that's because when he tries to lay down, he can't breathe, so he just sits all the time, and with him not eating, that's not helping either. So as bad as I hate to do it, I've already called the vet. We're scheduled for Monday to have him put to sleep, but at the same time, it's not fair to watch him suffer, so it's going to be a bit tough, but it's something that has to be done. But anyway, as far as my electronics background, I always had an interest in electronics, even as a toddler. In fact, my babysitter, they had a True Tone color console TV from the early 70s. It was a hybrid set, had some solid state devices and some tubes in it. And the reason I know that is because umpteen years later I was given that TV, but it was had been stored and it had been dropped out of an airplane. But anyway, I was given that set umpteen years later, but it was too far gone. It had been used and abused and stored in way less than ideal conditions, and I ended up junking it. But anyway, I would sit in front of that TV and turn all the knobs on it. I didn't want to play with the other kids that she was keeping. I just wanted to play with that TV. And then over the years, after my grandparents adopted me, people would give me stuff, and I really didn't try to fix any of it. I would just tear it up, see what it was made out of. And then I guess the first thing I learned how to do was spray WD-40 and scratchy volume controls, which I know now that wasn't the best thing to use, but, you know, at that time I didn't. Elementary school age, I didn't. I guess I was about 12 whenever I decided to get serious about actually fixing stuff, but I still didn't know that much, and I decided I wanted an old tube radio. And we were at a family reunion in Georgia, and I mentioned my wants to a guy there who was probably in his 50s at the time, and he didn't really say much, so I forgot about it. A couple of weeks after we got home, we got a phone call saying that UPS was delivering a package that day, and that package was from that guy at the family reunion. He sent me a circa 1936 wooden-cased Silvertone radio and an electric train transformer. And then Dad offered to reimburse him for the shipping, which of course wasn't nearly as high as what it is today. That would have been in 1989, and he said absolutely not. I'm not taking any money. Brian mentioned to me that he was looking for a radio, and I thought I had one, but I didn't want to say anything to him because I wanted to make sure I had it first, because I didn't want to say anything to him and then I not have it, which I wished everybody was that way, but, you know, that's another story. So that's how my antique radio collecting got started, and I still have that Silvertone. But I had this wild hair that I could take stuff to the TV shops and get it fixed. Well, nobody wanted to work on any of my stuff because it had tubes in it. And some of the older TV shops that had been around a while, they didn't even want to fool with it either. Some of them would take the radios in, but then they would give me a cock and bull story about, well, all the tubes are weak and you can't get tubes anymore, so you just need to just sit this one up on the shelf and look at it. And I think that was just a case, so they just didn't want to mess with it, so they just give me a story just to get me out the door. And some of them even told me, I don't understand why you want to mess with that old stuff. Technology has gotten a lot better. Newer TVs are more reliable and easier to service, so there's just really no point in anybody bothering with fixing that old stuff with tubes in it anymore. So I quickly learned that I was going to have to learn how to do this stuff myself. So one day I said, Brian, there's no reason why you can't do this. Even with a visual impairment, you should be able to do this. So by making a lot of mistakes and letting the magic smoke out of stuff, and being fortunate enough to have one or two mentors who were retired radio and TV repairmen that showed me what they knew, and taking electronics courses in high school and college, I learned a good bit, and to this day I'm still learning. And when I run up on somebody who acts like they know it all and they think they're the only one that is qualified to do anything, then I'm very suspicious of those type of people, and I wouldn't let them touch anything of mine with a 10-foot pole. So I'll now tell you about my mentor, who I met probably in 1991, I think it was 91. He was a retired radio and TV repairman who started in the late 40s, and he had a shop in a little place called DeKalb, Mississippi, and he closed his shop, I think, in 1973, partly due to health issues and partly because TVs were shifting to solid state, and combined with his health issues, he didn't really want to buy new equipment for working on solid state stuff and learn about solid state stuff, so he just got out of the business. I think he continued to fix stuff for family and friends, but he no longer fixed stuff for the public anymore. As far as how me and my mentor met, there was a local call-in show on one of the AM radio stations where you could buy and sell and trade stuff, and I was always calling into that, looking to buy old radios and various electronic things and trying to sell some TV or whatever. And this man who lived in an assisted, well, it wasn't an assisted living apartment, it was an apartment that was based on your income, mainly for senior citizens, not far from my house. He heard me, and he called and wanted to speak to my mother, and he told her that he was a retired radio and TV repairman, and that he had recently lost his wife, and that he knew a lot about old tube radios and such, and that he felt like he could be beneficial to me, and would it be okay if he came by? And Mama told him yes. And as it turns out, he had lost his wife a few months earlier. I believe she passed away in her sleep unexpectedly, and he told me that he had been hearing me on the radio for some time, but he just didn't have whatever it took to call me, and he said on the morning that he called me, he said to himself, Now, Lloyd, are you going to sit here and keep feeling sorry for yourself because your wife died, or are you going to get off your butt and go help that kid? So he made the decision to get off of his butt and come help me out, and that resulted in him coming to our house most every Saturday for about the next 2.5 years. He'd usually get over here about 9 in the morning and stay till 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he would usually eat lunch with us. And on the Saturdays he couldn't come, he would usually come by a day or two before and let me know, I've got such and such going on Saturday, I'm not going to be able to make it over. Well, after about 2.5 years, he came over one Saturday, and he said, at the end of the day, he said, well, I've got to get back home, I'll see you next week. And I said, well, it was good to see you, and you take care, and we'll see you next Saturday. Well, next Saturday came, and he didn't show up. So me and Mama went looking for him, and his car was not at his apartment. Nobody answered the door. There was nobody around to ask. We kept going back periodically over the next few weeks and finally caught one of his neighbors out. And we asked about Lloyd Gardner, and he said, oh, Mr. Gardner, he got married and moved to Sebastopol, Mississippi. And we were all like, what? We had no earthly idea that Mr. Gardner was even seeing anybody, but it was a bit hurtful to us that he just up and left without telling anybody what was going on. But looking back, I guess I can cut him some slack, because they say when you get seriously involved with a woman, you'll sometimes lose sight of things. Well, probably went 2.5 years that I didn't hear a word out of him, and one day me and Mama were coming home, and whose car was in our driveway but his? And yes, me and Mama both had something snobbish to say about it, but we stopped, and Mr. Gardner and his new wife and Dad were all in the living room visiting. Now, knowing how Dad was, I'm surprised Dad didn't tell him off and put him on the road, because Dad was not happy with the way things went down. Now, me and Mr. Gardner did reform a relationship, and he did bring up about the fact that he knew I probably felt bad about him for the way things went down, and he apologized for that, but our relationship never was the same as what it was prior to him remarrying. And I did end up getting some of his stuff after he passed away, and I am thankful that he came along, because he taught me a lot that I might not have learned as quickly as I had he not come along. Now, as far as my electronics courses, I took electronics for my junior and senior years of high school. I don't really remember that being an issue. They didn't really give me any problems about that. However, whenever I graduated from high school and was getting ready to enter into the local community college, I wanted to get into the electronics program. The counselors threw a fit, told me I didn't need to do that, and somebody with poor eyesight doesn't need to get in the electronics program, but you do fine in the computer technology program. Well, I expressed my displeasure to Mama, and Mama, who should have been siding with me, sided with the counselors. So just to shut up everybody, I ended up getting into the computer program. I did not complete the program, and my grades were not really that good while I was there, because I didn't really want to be there in the first place, so I didn't really give it my best. Now, I met some wonderful folks who I'm still friends with today while I was in that program, so I'm glad it worked out the way it did. But then my dad died, and then some other drama took place that I won't get into, and I was to the point where I was just fit to be tied. I didn't really give a crap. My grades got so bad that they put me on academic probation, and that's where they give you a chance to pull your grades up. But if you don't pull your grades up, then you get placed on academic suspension, and that's where they give you a semester off to get your act together. Well, I got placed on academic suspension, and I remember the day I got the letter, and at that point in my life, I told Mama, well, that's fine with me, because it'll be a cold day in hell before I go back to that damn place again. And I was out for, I think, about 9 months. And one day Mama approached me gently about going back, and I said, only if they will allow me to take what I want to take. And she said, son, I'm behind you 100%, and I apologize for not supporting you earlier. I said, well, there's no need to apologize. You were just doing what you thought was best. So we went back up there. The counselor started their song and dance again. And I said, look, you can either enroll me in the electronics program or I can see my way out. So you just decide what you're going to do now. And after a lot of back and forth, she finally said, well, go talk to the instructor, and if he gives the okay, then we'll sign you up. So I went to talk to the instructor, who was a German guy, Dietmar Getz. I told him about my condition. We discussed what I was able to do. He said he'd love to have me in his class, and he called up there and told them to sign me up. And I'll always have a special place in my heart for him. I mean, he's deceased now, but he could have just as easily said no. And then had he done so, that would have been the end of it, because he was the head instructor, so pretty much what he said was law. But he didn't say no. He was willing to give me a chance. And things worked out very well. The only thing I ever got mad at him about is he retired at the end of my first year. But after 33 years, I would say he was probably due for retirement. But I really wished he would have taught for another year, and then I could have had him for first and second year. Now, my other instructor the first year, he taught more of the digital stuff, was the late Mr. Walter Hammock. And I thought a lot of him as well, but at first I just think at first he probably had some questions as far as a visually impaired person being in the electronics program, but we did get to the point where we got along. And I remember whenever I was getting ready to graduate, me and him were in the storage room between the two classrooms, and he said, Brian, I just have to tell you that when you were first in my class, I thought you were going to be a big problem. But he said, I soon found out that you weren't a problem at all. I'm the one who had the problem. And I just want to tell you what a pleasure it's been for you to be in my class, and you're welcome to come back and visit any time you want to. And I thanked him for the kind words, and I don't hold anything against him for that. It's like I said in the other video about my teachers. I can't fault somebody for being afraid or having questions or being anxious about what they don't know. What I fault people for is when they refuse to be educated and refuse to give people a chance. And obviously Mr. Hammock chose to give me a chance and to be educated. Now for the second year, when Mr. Getz retired, I had Mr. Hammock and a fellow by the name of Mr. Kenneth Carroll, and he was a nice guy, and we never had any issues, but he didn't stay there all that long. I don't know what happened. He might have been there for a couple of years. I don't know, but things went really well in the electronics program, and I'm glad we were able to pull it off. Now, I'll tell you about a couple of instances. There was a somewhat cocky guy in there that Mr. Getz paired me with as a lab partner. And he told me, if you have any problems, let me know. I said, well, I don't think we're going to have any trouble. Well, one day Mr. Getz was walking around observing, and noticed this guy doing something wrong, and Mr. Getz firmly but professionally called his hand on it without putting him on blast in front of the whole class. And as soon as Mr. Getz walked off, this guy, in a huff, as he was gathering his belongings, told me, "I don't have to take that shit off of nobody. I'm out of here." And I tried to stop him, but he wasn't hearing it, and he left and never came back. And I remember thinking, if you're going to get that wound up over an instructor calling your hand on something, then God help you when you get out into the real world, because you're going to get your butt crawled for anything and everything and things that are not even your fault. And I remember one time Mr. Getz getting on me in the same way, and what I was doing was he wanted us to use the external multimeters, either the Simpson 260s or the digital benchtop meters, but I had a bad habit of looking at the meter on the power supply, and he didn't really want us doing that because he wanted us to learn how to use the external meters, and he knew the external meters were more accurate. He called my hand on that a couple of times, and one day he caught me doing it, and he said, "I'm not trying to give you a hard time, but if I catch you doing that one more time, I'm going to put a piece of tape over this meter on the power supply, and then you'll have to look at the other meters." And that pretty much broke me from my transgression, and that's probably why I got a B for a lab grade that semester instead of an A. And something else I remember is Mr. Getz one day threw me a kit, and he said, "I don't want to hear a word about missing parts." And I'm looking at this kit, and it's one of these electronic decision maker things, and every part in it was surface mount, and I had never experienced that before. So I put it together under the closed circuit magnifier thing, and when I was finished, it didn't work, and I showed it to him, and he found a good many bad solder joints that I had made, and when I showed him what soldering iron I'd used, he said, "Well, this is your problem. If you'd used an iron with a smaller tip, I think you would have done okay." So he corrected my mistakes, and he said about the best grade I can give you on this is a C-, and I said, "Well, I appreciate your generosity." But some people might say, "Well, he shouldn't have required you to build that, with low vision." Well, why not? I expect to be treated as much like everybody else in the class as possible, so why shouldn't I have been required to build that? And he knew that there could come a time in the real world that I might be required to deal with surface-mounted stuff, and I needed to know how to deal with it. So no, I don't think that I should have been exempt from building that little class project, all because I have low vision. Even though it didn't exactly turn out perfect, I came up with a way to get it done, and I learned from my mistakes. Now, I still don't really care about dealing with surface mount stuff, but if I'm backed into a corner and have to, then we'll come up with a way to get it done. I'd much prefer through-hole parts on a circuit board and or hand-wired point-to-point construction like what's in this talking book machine here. Now, there was another guy in our class who was probably about 35. He was a good bit older than us. Loudmouth, arrogant, smart butt that thought he was God's gift to women, and he thought he knew everything. And every time he came into class, he was either mouthing off about some girl he wanted to get it on with, or talking about how high he got the weekend before, or if we were given an assignment, he'd start some crap as far as, "Well, I don't know why I'm having to do this shit. I was an industrial mechanic for 13 years. I shouldn't have to do this shit." And then once he got into it, it was determined that he really wasn't as smart as he thought he was. And I'll tell you a story about him whenever I dumped the camera card. So one day we were sitting out at the break table, and this smart bud and me and a couple of others were sitting out there. And he asked me, he said, "Brian, do you know that real pretty blind girl on campus?" And I knew where he was probably going with this, and I said very coolly, "Yeah, I know her. What about it?" "Well, man, you need to hook us up." Now, just to give you a little backstory, number one, me and this girl were not friends. We tolerated each other when we had to, but, you know, we were not friends. She was a bit snooty, and I don't go along with that kind of behavior. We did not run in the same circles. And number two, I knew for definite that she had a serious boyfriend. And on that note, I will say that I've observed over the years that it seems like it's a lot easier for a visually impaired female to get a sighted boyfriend than it is for a visually impaired male to get a sighted girlfriend, and that's just been my observation. But I told him, I said, "I think you need to forget about her because I happen to know that she has a serious boyfriend." And then he made some crack remark, "Well, if I could spend some time alone with her, I'd make her forget all about that damn boyfriend." Now, even though that girl was not my favorite person, even had I known she was single, I would not have put her on to the likes of that clown. Well, when he said that about making her forget about the other boyfriend, this other smart bud at the table said something to the effect of, "Well, just cut up some pieces of paper in the size of dollar bills and let her feel that and make her think you got money and she'll fall all over you." And then I had to give him a quick lesson on the facts of life as far as generally speaking, we can feel paper and tell if it's currency or something else, so stop showing your stupidity. And I said, and not all girls are into it for money, so just shut up. Okay, so what else? Going back to my early teenage years, going backwards a bit, I remember the first two televisions I was given. One was a little 16-inch black and white RCA from about 1963, and the other one was a 19-inch Zenith Chromacolor 2 Space Command set with the 4-button clicker remote from probably about 75 or so. Now, keep in mind, I still didn't know a lot about repair, but I managed to fix both of those sets. I sold the color set, and then I watched the black and white set in my room for probably a year with a UHF converter attached to it. Well, then I came into possession of a 19-inch Philco Forward black and white set that had UHF built in it, so I advertised the little RCA for sale for $25. And on the day I advertised it, a guy called me. He said, and this was a younger guy, he said, "I just got married, I don't have much money, I need a TV." And I said, "Well, here's this one, but it doesn't have UHF." And he said, "Well, I don't really need that because I have the limited basic cable." And back then that was channels 2 through 12, I believe, and it was something like at most $7 a month. Now that's just how much things have changed over the years. Back then you could pretty much sell any kind of working TV you could get your hands on, but now that TVs are so cheap at Walmart now, nobody really wants a used one, and if they buy a used one, it's got to be a very late model and it's got to have all the bells and whistles. They don't want last year's model. But after selling those two TVs, that got me to thinking that, hey, I could make a little money doing this. So as a teenager, that's pretty much what I did. I picked up old TVs and those 1970s all-in-one stereos, and I would fix those up and sell them. And even as a teenager, I didn't like the idea of asking my parents for money. That just didn't appeal to me. And I know one time we were somewhere and Dad run into one of his friends who was griping because his kid always hits him up for money, and Dad said, well, I'll have to brag on this one. He's never asked me for a dime. And I semi-jokingly said, because I knew I wouldn't get it. Now, as far as working on this stuff with a visual impairment, I'm not going to lie, there are times it's been challenging. I usually have to get really close to see it, and there have been times I've had to put stuff under the closed circuit magnifier to see what I needed to see, but I usually manage to get it done, and I can tell you that it's strictly by God's grace that I'm able to do what I do. God gets all the credit. And most people that I came in contact with, they were encouraging as far as what I did, but I did run into a few negative Nancy's, and you know, that's to be expected with anything, but just the key is just don't let stuff like that discourage you. Just consider the source as to where it came from, and just press on and prove to them that you can actually do it. Now, if you're a counselor or a teacher or whatever, don't discourage a student with a quote-unquote disability from doing something. Let them try, and you might find out that they're able to do it quite well. And if they get into a certain program of study and discover that that's not for them, then at least they know they tried. And as long as they gave it their best shot, then that's all anyone can ask for. Now, I mean, there are certain things, for example, someone who is blind is probably not going to be well suited to enroll in the truck driving program, but you know, just don't think that just because somebody has a visual impairment that they can't do anything, because that is far from the truth. I know my friend that I mentioned in the other video who has a girlfriend who is considerably older than he is. He is very good at working on clocks. In fact, I would trust him to fix any kind of clock that I needed working on. And one time I think somebody said something to his girlfriend about wanting a clock fixed, and she said, well, my boyfriend can help you out with that. You know, he's blind, but he does very well at fixing clocks. And he immediately copped an attitude and let her know, well, no blind person's coming nowhere near nothing of mine. I'll just take it to so-and-so. And so-and-so was a well-known shyster that did half-baked work and charged 10 times the price for doing it. So, you know, they were like, oh, okay, well, if you want to take it to the other guy, take it to him. It's no sweat off of me, you know. And here he is, just sitting here. You can tell he's not looking very good right now, and you can tell he's not very comfortable. So I'm just going to try to keep him as comfortable as possible over the weekend. This is Friday, and Monday my friend said he could take me to the vet, and we're going to do this as bad as I hate to, but I know it needs to be done. Now, shifting gears for a minute, if you're the parent or guardian of a child, please do not discourage them from having hobbies as long as those hobbies are legal. Because if you discourage them, then they could very well find something to do that is not exactly legal, that could put them in danger and make them well known to law enforcement. But anyway, as I was saying, it's getting to be dark 30 out here, but my parents, for the most part, were generally very accommodating and very supportive of my hobbies. The only time I remember it really being an issue is when I let my grades at school slump. And I remember Dad telling me in no uncertain terms, if the grades don't come up in short order, then your hobbies will be taking a back seat. Now, I remember a time Dad blew up when I had TVs piled up in the basement, which was his workshop, and he couldn't get to his stuff, and he made me haul a bunch of TVs to the dump, which was comical because somebody I knew went out there and found them, and they didn't know I'm the one that dropped them off. so they loaded them up and brought them back to me. And then there was a time Dad blew a gasket when I had a TV blown apart on the kitchen table and it was getting close to supper time. And then there was the time I had one of those little 11-inch GE black and white sets from the mid-'60s. I think Shango did a video on one several years ago. Back whenever I was a teenager, those things were still fairly common, but like so many other things, they're about non-existent today. But I did something really stupid. The bed was often my workbench, and I had this TV blown apart, plugged in and operating, sitting on my bed. And what made matters worse is I left the TV unattended, sitting on my bed. And when Dad come in, walked down the hall and looked in my room and saw that, he went in there and yanked the plug and then read me the riot act, which he should have done, because that was very stupid on my part. But, you know, I was blessed to have parents that were supportive of my hobbies for the most part. I've known other kids where their parents were not as supportive and things didn't really go as well as they should have. I remember in about 91, I guess it was about 91, about the time I met my mentor, a guy started a local antique radio club here, the Mississippi Historical Radio and Broadcasting Society, and we did things in conjunction with the Alabama Club. And that club consisted mainly of older members. I was the youngest member they had, and I ended up being the vice president of the club. And I think we disbanded in 98 or 99 because everybody was either getting too old to participate and in too bad a health, or they were just passing on and they were no longer with us. And some people didn't particularly care for the president, who could be a bit of a horse's patoot at times, and he was one of those that thought he knew more than he did. I remember my mentor saying one time, he's a smart man, I'll give him credit for that, but he's not as smart as he thinks he is. And I remember me and him going round and round one time about, he swore up and down that a 5U4 was a rebased 80, and I said, no, a 5Y3 is a rebased 80. And we went round and round, and him telling me I was wrong, and I finally had to show him in a tube manual that electrically a 5Y3 and an 80 is the same. It's just the 80 is a 4-prong tube, a 5Y3 is an octal tube. Now there is a 4-pin version of a 5U4, but I can't think of the number right offhand. Now as far as the social aspect of my hobby, whenever I was a teenager and even into adulthood, the only thing I wanted to talk about was radios and TVs and such. And I remember my mother telling me one time, she said, son, I know you live and breathe this stuff, but not everybody likes this stuff like you do. In fact, most people couldn't give two hoots about it. And they don't want the whole conversation to be dominated by radios and TVs. Well, at first I was offended by that, but I later learned that she was correct. So when I'm in mixed company, I usually don't even bring up my hobbies unless somebody asks me a question, or unless I'm in the presence of people who engage in the same hobby. So unless those conditions are met, I generally don't even bring up what I do, because I know the majority of people really couldn't care less about it. Now, I've got another inspiring story to tell you, a continuation of the relationship video I made a while back. I have another friend who is legally blind and messes with radios and such. I don't know his exact age, but based on some of the things he's told me, I'd say he's in his 70s now. And we were talking just yesterday about this. He saw my relationship video, and he was telling me that he went through some of the same things that me and my totally blind friend have gone through with girls. He said he had even been stood up before. And so that just shows that this kind of behavior is nothing new. It's always been around to some degree. It may be worse in today's world than what it used to be, but it's always been with us. And he said he had gotten to the point where he just had given up on being in a relationship with anybody, and certainly didn't figure he'd ever be married. So, but later in life, he started praying about it, and he said a miracle happened. He met a lady. They got married. They've been married about 22 years now, and everything's going great with them. So, you know, don't lose hope. You know, it may seem like all hope is lost, but don't lose hope. And the best advice I can give is to place God at the center of your life and in the center of your relationship efforts, which is something that, even though I have been a Christian for a long time, I didn't always place God in my endeavors to get a relationship going, and the results were that things didn't go so well. Alright, just to show you that the talking book machine from 1959 still works, motor on.
It is at the bottom of life we must begin, and not the top. Nor should we permit our grievances to overshadow our opportunities.
Yep, it still works. And it sounds better than the plastic craptastic things that they were sending out during my time. But anyway, in the other video, I talked about rejection and how I had basically gotten to a point where I just threw up my hands and said, no more of this, because when all that ever happens is rejection and hurt and drama, then I just finally gotten to a point where what's the use when we know going in what's going to take place. Now, maybe I was a little drastic with that, but I will say that even today, I generally won't, quote unquote, go there with someone unless I get to know them really well and give them a chance to get to know me really well. And on that note, I know it's very easy to paint everybody in a bad light when all you get is rejection and rejection and rejection, but there still are some good people in today's world. And I'll now tell you the story about one such person who I mentioned in the other video, but I did one of those things that I often do and got way too long-winded, and I decided to delete that portion of the video and to add some other things to the video that I forgot to add on the first go-around. So I will give you the Reader's Digest condensed version of that story in this video. Years ago, I was going to a small Baptist church, and there was a girl who was in elementary school there along with her family. And even back then, this girl had a very kind and compassionate and caring heart. On Wednesday night prayer service, she was usually putting someone on the prayer list. If someone in her school had a need or somebody they knew was dealing with something, she would lift them up in prayer. And that's something that more people in all age groups need to be doing, instead of developing a me, myself, and I attitude. Well, when I stopped going to that church, she was probably in middle school, and then later, after she was well into her teenage years, we became friends on Facebook, and I'm also friends with her mom and dad and brother. And at some point, when she was probably about 17, somebody had something snide to say about me, and I don't remember exactly what it was, and I don't remember exactly what she told them, but she politely but firmly lowered the boom on them and told them that they needed to lay off. And that gained her a lot of brownie points that day, because it's rare in today's world that people are going to take a stand for the right thing. And for a teenager to do that, then that is truly saying something. Well, fast forward to about 2023, she was in her second year of college by this time, and they were having a moving sale at their home, and me and a friend went. I loaded up on electronics. He didn't buy anything because he's so tight he squeaks. And she was there. She was happy to see me, and we had a good visit. And I can tell you, today, this girl is a Christian conservative. She still has a very kind, compassionate, and caring heart. She is extremely smart, and she places great emphasis on her education and her job. And she just recently completed 4 years of college. She has a job now, and she is looking to further her education. And those are all very good qualities that more people need to possess. And she is very mature, in fact more mature than most people her age. And in recent months, me and her have started talking more, and I had recently put some stuff on Facebook about the dog, and I communicated with her privately about the dog and some other things going on, and she messaged me back on Facebook and told me that she was sorry about the dog and that she knew I was having a rough time here lately, and that she just wanted me to know that she was praying for me and the dog and the veterinarian, and if there was anything that she could do to make my day better, then all I had to do was reach out to her, and that meant a great deal to me, more than she will probably ever realize. Now, for the months we've been talking, we've been discussing wanting to get together for a face-to-face interaction over lunch, but for whatever reason, we just haven't been able to make that happen yet, and I feel like a good bit of that is because she is so busy with family obligations and work and trying to get the next phase of her education off the ground that she probably just hasn't had a lot of time to make our lunch visit happen yet, but I feel like it will one day, and I'm truly blessed to have her as a friend. And I'm thankful that God brought us together all of those years ago. And I can think of a couple of reasons right now for God bringing us together. Number one, I had kind of gotten in a rut of putting people in a bad light. And this was a wake-up call to remind me that not everybody is going at things in a negative way, so to speak. And also, I'm not saying my prayer life had become non-existent, but it had gotten rather lackluster. But when me and her started communicating, I found myself praying more, not only for just her, but for other people as well who I knew had a need. So there are two reasons right there that I can think that God made her a part of my life, and for that, I'm very thankful. Well, I see the pooch made his way to the backyard. Maybe he finally took a dump. He hadn't done it in about 2 or 3 days. But as you can see, he's just worn out and just sitting here now. And last night, Friday night, was not particularly good, and in fact, I was questioning if he would even make it until Monday, so I'm just trying to keep him as comfortable as I can right now, and then when Monday rolls around, we'll take care of this that no pet owner wants to ever have to face, but it's a harsh reality. Now, it just dawned on me that you might be interested in hearing what took place as far as my low vision. Well, that is a result of me being born 3 months premature, and the amount of oxygen they had to give me to keep me alive is what had a negative effect on my eyesight. But I will say that my vision has pretty much remained stable from the time I was born up until the present day. But I was made aware at a young age that there could come a time that I would lose what I've got. And I was also made aware to pay attention to the warning signs as far as what happens when a retina starts to detach or things like that. And if I see any of that to seek medical attention immediately. Well, by the grace of God, I've made it this long, and I still have what I've always had. But if the time ever comes that I lose it, then I don't really think I'll be getting mad at God about it. I'll just be thankful that He gave me as much time with the eyesight that I have, and then we'll just have to take steps to keep on trucking, as Eddie Kendricks would say. Now, yes, if I were to lose what I have, we can handle it one or two ways. I could either give up and just waste away, or we could keep pressing on, and it would be better just to keep pressing on and come up with other ways to handle things. Now, with me, this is all I've known. I don't know any different, so there was really no adjustment process there. However, some people who may have had normal vision and then for whatever reason lost it along the way, that I can see where that would be a much bigger adjustment and it would be harder to cope with, but it's not an impossibility. It can be done. In fact, the lady that was head of vocational rehab for the blind here, she started losing her sight back in the 60s, and I think she had a couple of small kids and a douchebag for a husband. They ended up getting a divorce, and she was better off without him anyway. And then she eventually lost all of her sight, but she knew she had to better herself, so as a totally blind woman, she went back to school to become a counselor, and she raised her 2 kids on her own. And quite honestly, she was probably the best vocational rehab counselor they ever had up there. And that was a case where it took someone who actually walked in the shoes of a blind person to understand what other blind people are dealing with, and that's a lot better than someone who has never walked down that road before trying to make decisions for you, as in what the counselors were trying to do with me at the college when they didn't want me getting into the electronics program. But anyway, this battery is about dead, and I want to try to get this video up, so I hope you got something out of all of this, and if I can think of any more topics to discuss, we'll do it down the road. But for now, I think in these recent videos I've pretty much hit on everything that I wanted to hit on. So thanks for watching, and more to come later. Well, he did walk up closer to the house, but he's still just sitting here, and I'm going to leave him outside as much as possible today. I think that might be better for him than leaving him cooped up in the house. And so there you go. More to come later. Now, a friend of mine had a dog that was going through the same thing, and he just let the dog go on until the dog just died there at his house. And he told me I just couldn't bring myself to have him put to sleep. Now, I get that up to a point, but I also know that it's not fair just to let the animal just linger around suffering. And I know this dog here, his quality of life has diminished greatly. It's basically in the toilet now. I know he's hurting, he's uncomfortable, and as hard as it is to do, I think the best thing to do for him is just to have him put to sleep, and then that way he'll no longer be suffering. Well, just an update on the dog. He didn't make it till Monday, and I was afraid that would be the case. He died about 4:45 this afternoon, Saturday. He was sitting in the hall, and I got him to eat a bite or two of dog food, and I tried to get him to stand up, and he just didn't have the strength in his back legs to do it, and he just fell right back down into the sitting position. I left him a few minutes to go do something, and whenever I came back, that was the end of it. He was gone. So tomorrow, Sunday, I'll be digging a hole to bury him in the backyard there. But I prayed last night that God would ease his suffering. So God answered that prayer before I had to go Monday and make that decision that I didn't want to have to make. And I do believe that one day we will. But anyway, I don't even remember what I was saying when the phone rang, but I'll bury him tomorrow, and I will say that he was loyal up until the end, and I do believe that we'll see our pets again one day. And as hard as it is to lose him, I'm just thankful that he's not suffering anymore, and that he basically had a decent quality of life up until almost the end, 2.5 weeks before the end. So just wanted to give you an update on that, and we'll get back into some more stuff later.